5 terrifyingly true scary Reddit stories. My Ouija board tried to warn me. Submitted by Kellidactyl. Several years ago, maybe a year or so after I had finished high school, I was with a group of friends. I'll change everyone's name, including my own, for privacy reasons. Anyway, this group of friends and I were quite bored on a summer night in a small town, so naturally, we broke out a Ouija board. Like most places, we had our local ghost stories and, just tales told to keep kids out of them woods. Well, we took our $12.99 glow-in-the-dark Ouija board to one of our town's most infamous spaces at midnight. So me, Phoebe, along with friends Monica, Rachel, Joey, Chandler, Janice, and Ross, all went to our local junior high school courtyard where, legend has it, you'll hear a baby cry at midnight, to play the Ouija. We started by asking all the usual questions, and wouldn't you know it, not a damn thing happened. So, defeated and still bored, we trudged back to Rachel's place. She lived real close. Her mom was really chill, and looking back on it, maybe a little too chill. She told us that we should have lit candles, sat in a circle, really do the damn thing. So, being incredibly stupid and immature teenagers, we did it again. But this time, it was a little different. We asked all the usual, is someone here? Y, E, S. Do you want to harm us? N, O. Monica started acting strange. She was breathing kind of heavy and tearing up. No one else really noticed, but I did. I wish I had said something. Rachel asked, "Well, do you want to tell us something?" Y, E, S. What? Joey and Chandler had noticed by now that Monica was visibly and audibly upset. We met eyes, and not wanting to break the link that we had created without words, we agreed to just let it ride. What? Janice asked the Ouija board again. More forcefully this time. She was becoming scared and impatient. H, U, R, T. That's when Monica let go, began rocking back and forth, crying and sweating profusely. Ross started to go to her, but along with the others, I screamed for him to stop. Don't break the link! Rachel, eyes now brimmed with tears, asked, You want to hurt one of us? N, O. So, someone we know will get hurt, maybe? Y, E, S. Okay. We all sat back. Monica still noticeably hyperventilating. While Ross's face was still plastered with worry, Chandler gave me this "she's totally being dramatic" look. And honestly, I agreed. I wanted to get this moving along already, so I said, "Fine, who's gonna get hurt?" J, then circle around. J, rinse and repeat. We briefly discussed it as a group, and none of us knew someone whose name began with a J. Me again. So, someone with a J name is gonna get hurt? Y, E, S. How? W, R, E, C, K. Monica had visible tears rolling down her cheeks. I was beginning to get annoyed. Is anyone else gonna be hurt? Y. E. S. Well, who? I demanded impatiently. B. R. I. A. N. At this point, it was like 2 a.m., and we were all irritated and bored and just blew out the candles and quit playing. We never said goodbye to the board. I was actually spending the night with Rachel that night, and once everyone had left, we had settled into bed. It was about 3 a.m. And just as I had closed my pretty little eyes, my mother called me. My cousin Jay was in a really bad motorcycle wreck. He wasn't dead, but he was hurt really bad and in a coma. But here's what really had me fucked up. He and his wife had just had their son a couple weeks before. Yeah, they named him Brian. I know it sounds absolutely bonkers, but it's been almost 20 years, and my cousin Jay, he's alive. When he came out of his coma, he was just different. Sometimes I'll catch him looking at me, but I won't recognize his eyes. If I'm ever in a room alone with him, I'm just overwhelmed with this lightheaded feeling. I don't know, man.
Something used to stalk my brother. Submitted by Dread 6. When I was in the 8th grade, back in 2015, I lived in Fort Carson, a military post in Colorado. The house we lived in was pretty normal, for military housing anyway. Nothing really ever felt strange or creepy about the house itself. It was your regular 4-bedroom home in a small neighborhood of identical houses. I had already lived there for a few years and had nothing out of the ordinary happen to my family. If they did experience anything, they never told me, except my younger brother. My brother is the youngest out of me and my siblings and was only 4 at the time, so whenever he would talk about these things that scared him at night, a lot of the time I just assumed it was imagination. A year before we moved out of the house, my brother would often wake up in the middle of the night and scream and cry as if he was being hurt. First time it happened, the whole house ran to his room to see what was wrong, but he was just in the bed, pointing at the door and screaming. He said he saw a monster in the doorway. And at first, we all thought he had just had a bad dream or had an active imagination. However, almost every week after that, at least once or twice, he would wake up and just do the same thing. I've always had a huge interest in things that are paranormal or strange, so after a while I became curious to see if he really was seeing something. One night in the middle of the summer, while I was playing Battlefield 4 with some friends, I got up and went downstairs for a snack run. When I returned to my bedroom, I thought about what my brother would say about his doorway. Me and my siblings had our bedrooms on the second story of the house, and my room was directly across from the stairs. To the left of my door was a long hallway, with a bathroom between mine and my sister's room, then my brother's room at the end. Before I sat back down to continue playing, I decided to check in on him and look down the hallway to his room. Standing in his doorway was a tall figure that almost didn't fit in the doorway. The top of his spine was pushed against the top, and I could only see the bottom half of his head. It had pale skin and backward legs like a goat, except they were human legs. I was facing the inside of my brother's room towards his bed. I stared for a few seconds before I went back into my room and shut the door. What I had seen shook me up a bit, but I reassured myself that I was just probably seeing things, as all day I had been watching ghost videos and listening to creepypastas, so I decided to take another look. I wish I didn't. This time the Thing was facing down the hallway, staring right back at me. Its face had almost no features except for dark holes for eyes. Its arms hung almost all the way to the floor. I froze and immediately felt sick, and after what felt like an eternity, I pulled my head back into my bedroom, shut and locked my door. My brother didn't wake up that night, and he later would be afraid of my bedroom too, even during the day. I never left my room at night until we moved out of that house. I didn't tell anyone about it for a few years, and I still think about it from time to time. Often doubt if what I really saw is what I had seen. I don't know. Any of you had any similar encounters? My mother told me a story about her cousin's possession. Submitted by Meyums. My mother told me a true story of when she was younger. She was about 15 or 16. She had a cousin who was beautiful, fair skin, light eyes, auburn hair, sweet and kind. One night she was coming home late from a friend's house when it started to rain heavily. She was still a few blocks from home, so she took shelter underneath a giant tree. In Islam, they say you should not be out after sunset, and especially be out around trees, as that's where spirits roost. When my mother's cousin arrived home that night, she was shivering, wet, extremely tired. She went to sleep right away, and the cousin my mother once knew was gone. She woke up a different person, thing. There was no hiding behind her cousin's identity. This thing claimed he was a male, jinn, and he had found her to be a very beautiful. He wanted to marry her. He wouldn't be taking no for an answer. The cousin's parents called several imams. Each one tried prayers and to coax the jinn out. Leave this body, release her, let her go free. The jinn refused. My mother said it was so odd seeing her cousin. It was her cousin's body and face, but when she spoke, a deep male's voice came out. It would talk about places and faraway lands it had visited. My mother's cousin had never left this small town or village. She, or it, would produce fruits and vegetables that were out of season, not grown in that region. My mother said once her aunt and uncle were having trouble with their stone oven. In Pakistan, these stone ovens weighed a lot. It took 4 strong men to lift and move them. The cousin saw the parents struggling and moved the oven by her or itself. This was not their daughter. The strength and power that she or it displayed, as well as the magical things that she or it did, such as producing the fruit and vegetables without ever leaving the house, was unexplainable at this time. They knew this wasn't their daughter trying to be someone else. This was something else. My mother said the jinn stayed in her cousin's body for almost a year, until her aunt and Uncle Story reached a very pious and renowned imam. He traveled to the home and read the Quran prayers, had the cousin drink Zamzam water, didn't leave her side until the jinn finally left from the torture. My mother said her cousin didn't remember anything. It was as if her life had started from the night she originally came home, from standing underneath the tree. My aunt and uncle didn't tell her and had everyone else promise never tell her anything about her possession. My mother said her cousin was back, the same happy and sweet, kind girl that she used to be. She went on to get married to a nice man from her college, and they had 4 cute children. She's in her 60s now, and still doesn't know what happened to her all those years ago. My grandmother hesitantly confirmed the story and provided more details, only after promising I would never speak of it to anyone in Pakistan when I go to visit relatives. My uncles have also confirmed the story, witnessing for themselves what occurred. Possession apparently runs on both sides of my family, my mother, father. My father's side, it hits closer to home. I'll post that soon. Haunted Cabin Behind My House. Submitted by Crying Cryptid. This is a relatively old story that my dad has told me a few times over the years, but with Halloween coming up, it's been on my mind again. I myself have never been able to witness this house, though the description I've been given by multiple men 20-something years after seeing it gave me a very vivid image. To begin, I would like to mention that my father is a highly religious man, a preacher's son, and does not believe in ghosts or anything paranormal in the slightest. Nothing seems to spook him either, but he still swears up and down that he feels something unnatural that scared the shit out of him, even just from mentioning the story to me on the rare occasion that he would actually bring it up. Back in the late 80s, he had a few friends that would regularly hike over the waterfall creek bed behind our farm and would follow the trails up until they eventually met the frontage road off the interstate. Well, one night, they decided to take a different route, to go around the backside of another farmer's land, mostly to see the animals because they owned emus and other large pets that weren't common in the local area. Supposedly, after leaving the area and continuing into the woods, at night of all wonderful times, they managed to stumble upon what is described by all 5 men 20 years later as a Blair Witch look-alike house. It was a very, very old home, and my dad claims that just by looking at it gave him this ominous feeling, but of course they had to go inside and check it out. Inside, the house was a vintage cottage-style home that was probably built in the late 40s or early 50s, and the group was instantly met with writings and symbols in strange Latin-like languages, with a few English graffiti pieces that quoted a supposed satanic or pagan worshipping ritual, with certain pieces describing how to sacrifice a human soul to some supposed demonic entity. My father still claims to this day that certain symbols were painted on the walls in blood, while others were clearly spray paint. And I find it easier to believe because he also worked as a firefighter for years before this happened and had a lot of experience with having to see human blood and dismembered bodies on the freeway after car accidents. Past a small living/kitchen area was a stairwell that was so small that their shoulders would physically brush either side of the wall as they went up. And the stairs went straight, stopped at a small landing, then turned right. So as you started up, you could not see what might be standing at the top. At the top of the stairs, a door led to a large attic-style bedroom, where actual chain manacles and locks hung from one of the walls near a circular window at the end of the room, which was also completely covered in weird symbols and graffiti and, now more obvious and frightening, large, dried puddles of blood that had seeped into the floors and walls. Allegedly, once they were upstairs investigating the room, they swear they heard someone moving up the stairwell behind them quickly, but when they looked back, there was no one there. Everyone essentially told me that it sounded like heels clacking on wood Now completely spooked, they rushed back down the stairs to see if someone was playing a prank on them, was hiding downstairs. Surprise, surprise, they found nothing. No new footprints in the dust, and grime that differed from the ones that they left on their way in. To keep things interesting, I met with each of the guys separately to ask them about what they remembered, expecting maybe to find a crack or something to prove that they were exaggerating. But when I asked them, I got the same answer from each of them, with no hesitation. They got the same details right down to the minute that they entered the house and the minute that they left. But here is where it gets really strange. They left the house and for some unknown reason decided to try walking back a different route, using a compass to approach from the east instead of the south. They did this test more than 10 times that night, walking from every possible route or direction, yet they always came out the front entrance of the house, even when the compass and common knowledge of the area showed that it was physically impossible to be at the south end of the house when they moved in a straight line from the north, east, or west. There probably is some scientific explanation for it, but I haven't found one yet. These guys knew the woods literally like the back of their hand, and they still do to this day. Verging on feverish, and finally decide it's time to give up. When one of them nearly faints, as they turn to leave, the man who nearly faints turns and looks up, points at the circular window at the front of the house on the second story. Everyone looks and immediately sees a tall female figure, hunched over and standing in the window watching him, though they see no features on her face other than 2 large dark-colored eyes, and it sort of shuffled in place before turning and walking away as if it were heading to the stairs at the end of the room. At the sight of this figure actually moving, they all took off running through the woods, ending up on the side of the interstate about 3 miles from my dad's house, where they originally started from. They eventually made it back to my dad's place, though they claim that they felt as if someone were following them the entire way, and my dad's cousin gets up to get some water from the kitchen only to announce that he swore that he saw the same figure standing outside of the kitchen window near the edge of the woods, close to the woodshed. Thankfully, nothing ever came from the experience other than a collective state of absolute terror when the subject brought up. They wrote off what his cousin saw as paranoia or pareidolia, though 5 years later they decided to return to see if the house was still standing. Miraculously, it had fallen in on itself and was nothing more than a pile of rubble, and they never went back. I always joked with my dad and would ask him what he would do if he went back and found the house standing the same way it had been back then, trying to give him a reason to let me go and see the place for myself. But with trespassing laws being far more prevalent in today's times, it would be nearly impossible without getting shot or going to jail, as it was not our property. I don't know. It always gives me the creeps thinking about it, but I never considered the story to be true until I did this little mock interview with all the guys. When I say that these grown men are scared to death by this story, I mean it. Seeing them get physically worked up and frightened just by telling the story really caused me to be less of a skeptic. I don't know, what do you guys think? Could it be possible that they were just spooked? It caused them to see things?
Demon in the Doorway. Submitted by, yours truly. When I was 16 years old, I was spending the summer visiting with my Nana and Pawpaw, that's grandparents, for those of you that are not raised by Southern family. They lived on about 20 acres in a small town in central Oklahoma. There were miles of farmland all around, and neighbors were few and very far between. Seriously, I mean, their nearest neighbor lived almost a quarter of a mile away, and she happened to be my great aunt. It was extremely peaceful and quiet, and although at night it could sometimes feel a little ominous. As you entered onto the property, just off the main road, there was a long gravel driveway led up to the house. After about 80 feet, you could either go left and pull into the driveway, or you could continue straight and head toward the barn. About 100 yards beyond the barn was a graduating slope that separated a very large spring-fed pond from the main property, which, by the way, had some of the best wide-mouth bass and crappie fishing I've ever had in my whole life. Their house was a single-level, 3-bedroom, 2-bath ranch-style home with an attached 2-car garage. As you walked through the front door, to the left of the garage you entered the living room. To the left was a hallway that led to the bedrooms and the bathrooms. The main bathroom was the first door on the right. The guest room, where I usually slept, was the second door on the right, at the end of the hall. My grandparents, of course, slept in the master bedroom directly across the hall from my room. They had an attached bathroom, which basically was only used by my papa, so it wasn't uncommon to see my Nana shuffle across the hall in the middle of the night just to use the bathroom. She even kept a night light by the bathroom door for that very purpose. Now, I don't scare very easily, and like I said, I've experienced paranormal on several occasions, most of which happened at my old house in Utah. Nonetheless, something about that hallway, in particular at this house, creeped me out. I'd be sitting in the living room just watching TV and feel something watching me from the end of the hallway. My Nana kept an antique fabric doll on the small table at the end of the hall, and even though it looked somewhat creepy, it never really freaked me out. No, it wasn't that. This was something else. It was something foreboding. I could just feel it time to time leering at me, like it was intentionally trying to make me uncomfortable. One afternoon, I had just fed and watered the cows and was eating lunch, watching some TV before I went out fishing. My Nana was in the kitchen. My papa was out on his tractor about 3 miles away in the north pasture baling hay. As I took a bite of my sandwich, out of nowhere, I started to get that uncomfortable feeling again. Hesitantly, I looked left down the hallway, and I swear to you, I see that antique doll by itself turn completely to the right, so it is now facing my grandparents' bedroom. I froze, with my mouth full of half-chewed sandwich, jaw slacked open, trying my best to not make a big deal of it. I calmly go back to watching TV, but seconds later, couldn't help myself. I had to look again. Nervously, I looked back down the hall, only to discover that that doll has turned 180 degrees and is now facing my bedroom. There are no train tracks in this area, and the kind of vibrations it would have taken to cause that to happen, well, that would have been felt throughout the entire house. Needless to say, me and the rest of my sandwich, yeah, we left to go fishing. Later on that night, long after they had gone to bed, I was getting pretty tired myself and decided that I had delayed going to bed long enough. Told myself I was just being silly and there wasn't really anything to be afraid of. So I manned up, made my way toward the bedroom, telling myself along the way, the whole way, dude, it's no big deal. No big deal, dude. Just go to bed. Go to bed. As I stepped through the doorway, I even made it a point to say quietly, but out loud, you don't scare me. Just leave me alone. Yeah. Challenge accepted, I guess. Now, I'm a very deep sleeper, In fact, once while I was there visiting, I literally slept through a tornado. A short while later, after I had fallen asleep, I shot up in bed wide awake, as if someone was urgently trying to get my attention. The bed I was sleeping in faced a closet, and if you looked slightly to the right, there was the doorway to the bedroom. I always slept with that bedroom door open, and if you looked out, all you could see was the hallway that dimly reflected the nightlight from the bathroom. As I turned my head to look at the doorway, I saw a solid black-shaped figure standing at the entryway. At first, I just tried telling myself it's just my Nana stopping to look in on me on her way to the bathroom, but no. I knew that wasn't the case. I had seen her make that trip in the middle of the night many times, and it never looked like this. This thing, whatever it was darker than any shadow I had ever seen in my entire life. It's so hard to put into words, but even though this thing was featureless, I could tell it was staring right at me. And as horrifying as it was to look at, the feeling that it gave me was even worse. I can't even begin to explain the level of negativity and evil that was emanating from this. And just as I'm trying to process all this, oh God, suddenly it made a motion. Even thinking about it just makes me tremble. It made a motion like it was gonna enter the fucking room. In that same moment, as I lay there petrified and knowing full well at any second this abomination's gonna be even closer to me, it failed to breach the threshold. I mean, it's like something was preventing this thing from coming into the room. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's as if there was some sort of invisible force field preventing this thing from coming in. Not like that stopped it from trying, though. Over and over and over, it repeatedly tried coming in. And with every attempt, I grew more and more nervous and terrified that it was just finally gonna succeed. I thought about yelling out for help, but honestly, I didn't want to have them come rushing out only to discover nothing and then have to try and explain this fiasco. Or worse, risk the chance of my grandparents actually encountering this fucking thing and having them die of a heart attack or some shit. So, the only thing I could think to do was, embarrassing as it is, pull the covers up over my head like a child and pray to God to take this thing away. Now, I'm not an extremely religious person, but in that moment, it seemed like the right way to go. I mean, what the hell would you do? And don't you give me that I would have just blah, blah, blah bullshit. You would have metaphorically shit yourself, just like I did. I didn't even peek out from under the covers to see if it was gone, because I just knew if I did, either it wouldn't be gone, or worse, it'd be standing right there next to me, and I wasn't even willing to roll those dice. I even pinched myself hard to make sure I just wasn't having a nightmare. I stayed under the covers like that and prayed until I finally fell asleep. I woke up in the morning to the smell of bacon cooking, the sun shining, everything back to normal. I debated calling my folks to have them put me on the next earlier flight back home, but in the end, I decided that I wasn't going to let this experience ruin my summer vacation and deny me the time with the people that I love. I'm glad I stayed. They're both gone now, and leaving early is something that I know I would have regretted doing for the rest of my life. I never saw that thing again, and strangely enough, the hallway didn't creep me out to the level that it used to anymore. I did finally ask my Nana if she had ever experienced any ghost activity in there, though. She said, "Well, I've seen a couple of weird things, but if you don't pay it any attention, it'll leave you alone." Like I mentioned earlier, I've had several paranormal encounters in my life, but no matter how tough you think you are, or how much you think paranormal shit doesn't really bother you, nothing can prepare you for an experience like that. Thank you for being a part of this living nightmare. We hope to disturb you again soon.